Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our buddy Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, author, filmmaker. His latest film, Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman. His website, GregPalast, PALAST.com. Twitter, Greg_Palast. Greg, welcome back to the program. Dominion just settled with Fox yesterday for $750 million. Fox essentially admitting that they've been lying about the Dominion voting machine stealing votes. There's a larger issue here, though, and that is, number one, I suppose the privatization of our vote. Why do we have private corporations counting our votes to begin with? If we're going to use voting machines, shouldn't the government buy them and, program them? Because all of the software is not open source. None of it is open source. Nobody knows what's in the software. Although, apparently everything is hunky-dory and copacetic. But why is this not owned by the government? And number two, this whole long history. I mean, back when Bush was, took the election in 2000, there were a lot of us, I was included in that, who were concerned that maybe the voting machines were a little hinky, or at the very least that in the 2004 election, that in Ohio, the Ohio Secretary of State's office shut down and they had to reload the votes from a server in Kentucky, I think, or something like that. Or am I completely wrong on all that?
You're completely right and completely wrong.
Cool.
Number one, okay, you want the government to control it? You mean DeSantis and Kemp and Trump?
I would like the software to be open source.
Yes,
whether the government mandates it or whether the government owns it and it's open source because of Freedom of Information Act laws, I would like the software to be open source.
I would like not to depend on software whatsoever. And that's why in Los Angeles, we have a system that was created by the Venezuelan government. It's by a group called Smartmatic. What it does is it prints, you make your choice on a screen, it prints the ballots, it doesn't tabulate the ballots in a computer. You look at your paper ballot, you say, okay, I'll put it in the scanner, and then it goes in the lockbox and you can recount it, you got paper. You don't have to trust anyone. And that's what we should have, a system where we don't have to work on trust. You were right to be suspicious because for a couple decades, we had something called push and pray machines. You stick your finger on a candidate's name on a computer screen and you pray that they count that vote. But now, because there's been great activists like Bob Petrakis and Harvey Wasserman, we've gotten rid of push and pray. But what we have to now let go is this idea that they're still hacking these computers. That is, that someone is going in from a cave and manipulating the software and flipping your vote. That's over with. And now Fox is paying $750 million. That's just the beginning because Smartmatic, remember, they've accused Fox, Lou Dobbs on Fox and the rest of his gang accused Hugo Chavez of fixing the election to defeat Trump's reelection. Chavez has passed away a long time ago, and it's a canard that we on the left kind of began generating from our suspicions, legitimate suspicions. But now, as I've warned, the Fox crowd, the maggots, have picked up with Donald Trump this idea that we started. We fixed that problem. What we have to now do is look at the real problems with voting, which is vote suppression. Locking off the lock boxes, stopping souls from the polls, mainly black souls, from voting early and on Sundays before the election. These are the things, the massive purges that Brian Kemp has engineered, Chris Kobach of Kansas, interstate cross-check, these types of purges, which affect mostly people of color. We have to switch our attention to that and not go down the foxhole of some guy in a cave manipulating the software and flipping our votes. We had good reasons to mistrust that system, but now Fox has grabbed it once it's been proved that no longer is our problem. Our problem is the attack on the right of people of color to vote on a massive scale, and that's where we have to put our focus now.
Yeah, and this is really a substantial issue. I mean, the Supreme Court in 2018 legalized purging people from the voting rolls with very few criteria in that Ohio case. And Mike DeWine is purging people mostly in the cities that have large black populations in Ohio. It is happening in Republican-controlled states all across the nation. You saw a massive drop-off in black voters in Florida in the last election. Whether that was the result of voter purges or whether that was the result of Ron DeSantis parading, a dozen black people in front of the cameras, right, in handcuffs because they voted as felons is still something that they're debating down in Florida. But for example, you mentioned in your op-ed today that
at GregPalst.com,
at GregPalst.com, indeed, that in Detroit, which went for Donald Trump by something like 10,000 votes. There was something there was a whole pile of votes in Detroit that didn't get counted, and it wasn't just the voting machines. Tell us about that.
Well, what happened was, this is important to understand, the issues that affect voters of color, which the media ignores, and frankly, a lot of people on the left. So in 2016, Donald Trump supposedly won Michigan by about 10,700 votes. At the same time, ready for this? 75,355 ballots, 7 times Trump's margin, were never counted. Why? Because it's all paper ballots there, so it wasn't about computer manipulation. However, all those ballots were supposed to be put into scanners in Detroit. The scanners broke down en masse, so 75,355 ballots were never counted. And by the way, so Hillary, if those ballots were counted, would have won Michigan, and maybe that would have the other 2 states. But what happened is that Jill Stein paid for a so-called recount. It wasn't a recount, Tom. It was a counting of those ballots in Detroit. And who cast those ballots in Detroit? It was a counting for the first time of those ballots in Detroit. Trump was able to go into court, stop the ballot count, and therefore, there's no other way to put it. Michigan was stolen from Hillary Clinton by those machines. Now, how did that happen? Are the black managers of, it's black government in Detroit? Why are they knocking out black voters? No. They warned the state, the city clerk said, our machines can't handle this race. They're broken. Our votes won't get counted. And guess what? Rick Schneider, who was the Republican governor, said, well, you don't have the money, Detroit, and we ain't giving it to you. So they knew that black votes would not be counted, and 75,000 black votes were not counted in Michigan. This is a continuing problem. It's not about some guy in a cave, playing with the software, flipping a switch. So let's be careful about that. What it is, though, is systemic racism in the voting process, from purges to bad machines. In the barrios and ghettos, we get the worst hospitals, the worst police, the worst schools, and the worst voting machines. And when I say voting machines, simple things like scanners. In Florida, back in 2000, it wasn't someone flipping the votes. Most of those ballots were paper. You had things like in Gadsden County, the blackest of Florida's 67 counties, over 700 votes were disqualified because people put a check mark next to Al Gore's name, and then it said write-in candidate, and they wrote in Al Gore because that's what it said. A hyphen was missing. It's a minor thing, except that 700 black votes were thrown away,
which would have given Florida to Al Gore and
the presidency.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, to Al Gore. And so, but in the white counties, you had scanners in each county, in the white counties like Sarasota and Tallahassee. And if you made a mistake like that, because the ballot was misprinted, the ballot came back to you and you were given a fresh new ballot and told how to correct it. This is the apartheid in American voting, and we have to deal with this. And a lot of my friends on the left, and I hate to say it, it's an apartheid within our own voting rights movement, where a lot of the people that are talking about flipping votes and software and that type of manipulation, those are mainly my white colleagues. I'm one. And whereas the African American and other leaders of voters of color are talking about vote suppression.
Right.
And it's impossible because and the problem we run into now is that if you bring up vote suppression, like for example, the canard that we had a record turnout in Georgia, and Brian Kemp was praised for not attacking the black vote in this last election where he was Reverend Warnock was running for re-election. That's not true. There was a drop of 1 million votes, 1 million votes in the Senate runoff because they crushed the early voting period, the souls to the polls period, from 60 days to 7. And then they also cut off basically removed almost every drop box. They removed 75% of the drop boxes in Atlanta, while increasing in the white counties, increasing the number of drop boxes. So you end up with a problem that the media won't look at. And I really need my fellow voting rights advocates of a pale-face race to please pay attention to the issue of vote suppression. Otherwise, we're going to be put in the foxhole conspiracy group with Barty Romo and the rest of the gangs.
No, I get it. And it seems to me, Greg, that the solution to all of this, a very simple, straightforward solution, is to pass legislation, which was, by the way, included in the For the People Act, that every single Republican in the Senate blocked, and then Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, the problem solvers, refused to go along with, blowing up the filibuster to pass this thing. But the For the People Act explicitly said the people of America have a right to vote. And if you have a right to vote, then when Brian Kemp tries to do this stuff, or, et cetera, all these examples you've given, they have to prove why they should have the ability to violate that right. Whereas right now they don't have to prove that. There's no affirmative right to vote recognized in the United States. In fact, in Bush v. Gore, William Rehnquist wrote, "There is no right to vote for president of the United States." I mean, that's a verbatim quote from the ruling. So it seems to me like that's the solution.
Well, as you know, you're a student of the Constitution. John Quincy Adams said that there's no more dangerous system than democracy. So there's a reason why that the right to vote was left out of the Constitution. It was deliberate. So the riffraff, like us, don't get to vote, and certainly people of a certain color would not get to vote.
Right, and women.
But now we have to take this country back in that sense. But it's very important that we stop peddling this idea that there's a guy in a cave flipping our votes. Yeah. Let's talk about vote suppression.
Yeah, no, I get it. Greg Palast, the great Greg Palast, gregpalast.com. Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
Great talking with you.